Hello, I'm Martijn Gaat and this is Does Logistics Matter? A podcast on trends and innovations in supply chain and logistics. Answering yes to the question today is futurist and author Amelia Kallman. In this episode, we talk about the impact of AI on supply chain and logistics operations, how augmented reality will change retail as we know it, the risks of powerful AI, and the steps companies can take to safely implement these new technologies. Please enjoy my conversation with Amelia Kallman. Hi, Amelia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Amelia, the first question of this podcast is always the same question, and that question is obviously, does logistics matter?
Well, my answer is absolutely. I think it can be the difference between retaining customers or losing customers. I think it is becoming more important all the time, especially as people's attention spans really wane, and we see companies capitalizing on prioritizing logistics. And I think it is only going to get more important, especially as new technologies come in to influence supply chain and logistics.
And what is your personal link to logistics?
So I'm a futurist. So it's my job to know about the latest new and coming technologies and their potential impact on the future of business and our lives. So I am an expert in the different technologies and then how they influence different areas, like things like retail and supply chain, as well as other industries I speak on and do reports on and consulting. So when it comes to things like logistics and supply chain, I am mostly studying things like the impact of generative AI or the impact of meta hybrid working, the future of retail, which includes virtual as well as the digital and physical, and how that impacts all the different areas across the supply chain and logistics line.
Oh, that sounds absolutely great and interesting. Some of the things you mentioned, I know about, but some of the things you mentioned, I don't know about. So, please tell us more about these new technologies. You are talking about generative AI. I think. If you've not heard of ChatGPT, you've been living under a rock, I think. But it's for many businesses. For many businesses, it may be difficult to know what to do with it.
Yeah, so it is the biggest thing to happen to AI in our lifetime so far. And why it is different from any kind of innovation we've had with AI in the past is before we had to manually train, and it meant that AIs were trained on millions of parameters and data points. But now AI is able to sift through and select from unstructured and unlabeled data, which means that it can be trained on trillions of parameters and data points. So it's just gotten that much more smarter. And why everybody's sort of talking about it at the moment is because these smaller startup AI companies essentially kind of went rogue by introducing their R&D models into the public for us to train with our own questions and our own data. So all the big tech companies were also working on their own large language models or foundational models, whatever you want to call them, but they had sort of an unspoken agreement that they weren't going to release these into the public until they reached a level of maturity. And what I mean by that is being able to have some level of explainability, being able to rank truth or different sources, being able to not make things up and hallucinate when they don't know the answers, things like this. So the big tech companies, when these came out, I think the other thing too is the business model. So I think they had anticipated that they would sell these into the Accentures and the KPMGs and all those big kind of companies. So with these startups introducing it into the public for free, this was quite disruptive for everyone. And now we see Microsoft have invested 10 billion into OpenAI. We have Google that have kind of scrounged and put theirs out. Facebook have one coming out with 6 different kinds of search methods. Amazon uses it internally. They may come out and make it public. So, I mean, it's all happening. It's all kicking off.
So, and if we then look at supply chain or maybe a little bit more specific retail, what can these industries do with these new technologies with ChatGPT or OpenAI or the what do you call them? Generative AI.
Yeah, so large language models, foundational models, generative AI, yes, all of these things. So it is having impact across the board. People tend to be familiar with content and how it's impacting being able to accelerate content creation. Very soon, we are going to be able to see an example of moving from inputting text or speech or images, and instead of just getting something 2D, we'll be able to get something 3D out. And a lot of companies are working on this. I'm already starting to see examples of this coming down from very exclusive, high-end, expensive software. But we know even companies like Roblox are working on this. And this is going to be a huge bridge into the future internet, which we sometimes call the metaverse. So essentially, the future of our internet is moving from 2D to 3D. And again, all the major tech companies are working towards a future where we have a third must-have device, and that would be a pair of smart glasses. So today we don't actually have the computing and processing and networking power to support that mass adoption, to be able to support the technology in a small pair of glasses, like one that we might wear ourselves every day. But that's where they are working towards. So in addition to owning a smartphone and a laptop, they very much want a third must-have device into the mainstream market. And what this will also mean is that this 3D spatial internet is going to come into our physical locations. And we're going to be able to use AI to geopin 3D graphics, animations that are personalized, that are gamified to different physical locations. And we can actually do this today. Google have geospatial SDK, and in a day's time, you can create a 3D digital animated facade to your building. But where AI comes in and gets really interesting is being able to make those experiences adaptable to individuals. So no longer are we looking at creating just a product or a service or an experience that is for everybody. We're looking at being able to have the power to design so that it can adapt to individual behaviors and patterns and preferences. And this is pretty revolutionary. This is pretty big when it comes to design, which influences things like supply chain as well. And I can actually share with you an example specifically about generative AI and how it's being used by one retailer that's really disrupting supply chain. So Shein is a fast fashion company that has actually moved from fast fashion into real-time fashion. And they have created their own AI that scrapes data off of social media, and it's able to predict the trends of what's going to happen, be on trend tomorrow, what's going to be on trend next week. And it takes that information and it gives it to their designers, and the designers make the designs, give it to their manufacturers, and then it gets sold. So they have taken what usually takes the concept to consumer process 3 weeks, and they have gotten this down to 3 days. And they are creating 5,000 new items a day, which is 20 times more than their competitors at H&M and Zara. And I believe that this is going to get even faster because there's nothing stopping the AIs now from also creating those designs. And it will still have to go through a human who can say, yes, that's good. No, that's not good. Tweak this. That's a good idea. Maybe we can expand on that kind of thing. But we'll see this getting even faster. And as a result, we're seeing an entire industry arise out of offering these AI bolt-ons to competitors who need to be able to compete with the Sheins in their industry, no matter what industry they're in.
So, but when you're saying 5,000 items, my supply chain mind immediately goes, wow, how do they source those? I mean, I can see how AI could make designing things really fast, and also seeing things in the market and seeing a certain trend. But then, how does this company have the production capacity to actually physically put out these 5,000 new items?
Yeah, so it's on demand. So when it sells, it gets produced, it goes through that product. But they also have their own software that is used across the board from the designers all the way through to the manufacturers. And that means that everybody is linked up. So if there is a manufacturer who is snowed under and won't be able to produce that much, then it goes to somebody who has the capacity. So it's able to scale in real time, which I think is really fascinating.
And currently they are more on the custom, like more on the custom side, like low numbers when it comes, or is it like, because H&M does like I don't know, 100 or thousands or millions of t-shirts, but that's all pretty large volumes. And this, because it's so fast and so specific, it's lower volumes.
Unless it's really popular, and then they scale it up so that they have the capacity to sell more if those items are selling greater, or to cut an item if it's not being sold at all. And it's also a completely online company. They don't have physical brick and mortar, and also it uses the same algorithms as TikTok, which is the same algorithms as casinos and gambling. So it makes people constantly want to see what is new, what is next. And so they're going back to the app and checking, because they're constantly releasing new items.
Is it also like, because you're mentioning TikTok, which, for those that are listening that are less social media savvy, is a platform really based on short movie clips with sound bites with video in all sorts of ways. TikTok has it now. Instagram has such a feature. YouTube has such a feature. I mean, all these social platforms have this video feature. So do they do this in a content way as well, or is it just scrolling new items, or is it also a multimedia experience?
Absolutely. It's multimedia, and they really play in the influencers market as well. I just saw some statistics the other day. I think it's people have said that they trust influencers now more than they trust advertising and brands. So they really want that person to say, this is a great item. This is what we have. And that's another actually really interesting way, because we're seeing a rise of AI influencers who, again, work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they are able to take real-time data from what is trending on social media and be able to produce content that is relevant and contextualized to their specific audience, as well as interact, write comments, all these kind of things as well.
What would your advice be for more established companies with more traditional supply chains and traditional ways of how they've designed their retail operations?
So besides content generation, which I think a lot of people know about, I think where generative AI is really standing to offer new opportunities to logistics and supply chain companies are in the areas of personalization and predictability, as well as productivity. So MIT recently did a study where they empowered customer service representatives with AI assistants, and they found that this made them 14% more productive. They were able to resolve 14% more cases an hour. And what I found really interesting is that it took people who had up to 2 months worth of experience, and it elevated them to make them equal to people who had 6 months worth of experience. So this kind of like immediate upscaling. Then when it comes to personalization, I mentioned before this idea that we can start to create and design products that are adaptable and change, developing on depending on someone's personal preferences and patterns and behaviors, as well as sentiment, being able to judge someone's sentiment. If somebody's having a bad day or if somebody's having a good day, being able to adapt the product or the service or the experience in that way. And then, of course, we have predictability. And that is a huge one, especially when it comes to supply chain and logistics, being able to take historical data and combine that with real-time data to be able to make judgments immediately that are going to have the best possible outcome. I mentioned before, one of the things lacking right now from AI is this explainability, being able to say why it got to a certain conclusion or how it got to a certain answer. And there's a company called Rainbird AI that is actually able to take historical data, take real-time data of your company and how you make decisions as a whole, and is able to make a visualization and a map of that. So then you can start to automate decision making. And a decision that might take, all the C-level representatives 3 days, on a retreat to decide can actually be decided now in minutes using this kind of thing. And you're able to scale up, turn up and down the volume of variables. So if you go in this direction, what would that outcome look like? If you go in this direction, what would that outcome look like? And what this really means is that when it comes to things like compliance, being able to show how you got from point A to point B, this becomes a really big asset. Because what we're really lacking right now is any kind of ability to audit how this technology is being used. One of my biggest problems with it is that it has been released into the public without a user guide, without any kind of directions or instructions about its limitations, because we're reaching this quality barrier that I think has come faster than anybody anticipated, where we're seeing that, we're running out of data to train it on, public data for one thing. And so where I think it's going to move is into smaller language models. And I mean, eventually we could each have our own personal one. Companies are having their own. We have the example of Bloomberg GPT, which has Chat GPT, and then they have their layer of financial data on top of it. So if you're in the financial industry and you want an accurate answer, that one is going to be able to serve you better than a general Chat GPT-4, even though that was trained on 100 trillion parameters, things like that.
Yeah, well, and still garbage in is garbage out. So not everything that goes into the model is of good quality. I mean, I've tried ChatGPT, tried lots of things, and the the quality varies. Obviously, what the question that you ask is important. The quality of the question is important, but still, the quality of the content, it kind of looks nice, but it's the same. The text quality is the same as some of the image quality. It looks great, but if you just look a little bit further, you see that the people have 7 fingers. And it's the same with text. But I absolutely see the advantages. You were talking about some of the things like automating decision making, and also making something like a customer service more efficient. I see a link with the automation that we see going on in logistics operations as well, where robots are doing the more of the standard things and the heavy lifting and the repetitive things, and humans are moving more into added value activities. So the standard stuff is being handled by automation and robots, or in this case AI, which is let's say a software robot. And that gives us many possibilities as well.
Yeah, I was going to tell you a quick story. So I'm a judge at the AV Awards, and I have just finished judging. I think there was 45 entries, and I would say about 5 of them were written by ChatGPT, and I could tell. And they use all the right words. All the right words are there, but you can tell that it lacks soul, it lacks passion, it lacks a human behind it. And for that worker, that person who did it, they probably got 10 things checked off their list that day, and maybe without ChatGPT they would have only gotten 5. But again, it's the quality that comes out. And to be honest, it did influence how I judge them, because you kind of think, as a human, I'm a human reading this. If a human, can't be bothered to say that this was an amazing product or project or whatever, it makes me care less about it. But I guess in the future, this idea that we all might have our own smaller language models that are based on our own data, our own tone of voice, our own preferences, the way we talk and the way we speak about things that we're passionate about, in the future, this might actually come across more human. And another thing when it comes to retail and supply chain that I find interesting is our at-home smart speakers. They believe that when we include these large language models into our smart speakers, that this is going to increase sales done directly through our speakers by up to 98%. And this is the original concept, right? That's the original concept of these speakers, was to become more like a companion, to become, a colleague, someone you can bounce ideas off of, and be more assured in the decisions that they help you make. And again, with customer service, being able to increase that, accelerate that. We've seen bots, and I think a lot of us have been quite frustrated with the friction that we can have sometimes with customer service bots taking you around in circles, and you kind of think, I just really want to talk to a human who understands. So if we're able to replicate that with AI and able to answer calls on the first ring and resolve cases within 5 minutes, most people say that that's absolutely fine, and they will take that over waiting in line on hold to speak to a human for hours.
So what other technologies do you see that can have a big impact on supply chain and on retail? So we have generative AI. You mentioned the metaverse. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So one thing to keep in mind is that by 2030, 58% of the workforce is going to be made up of Gen Z and millennials. We have Gen Alpha entering the workforce, and we'll also have the largest population of people over 60 ever many of whom will still be working. We have 59% of experts agreeing that we are going to continue to see companies decrease their physical real estate in favor of things like short-term leases, co-working spaces, and continued remote home working. So we're looking at having the most disparate workforce ever, with varying levels of experience as well as different levels of expectations. And I think over the last couple of years with the pandemic and COVID, we've all come face to face with the constraints and downfalls of both physical working and digital working. And introducing this virtual aspect into this what I call meta hybrid working, which includes physical, digital, and virtual, I think is going to be key in moving us forward as far as productivity goes, accelerating things like collaboration and design. So when it comes to supply chain and logistics, being able to really be able to meet with your entire supply chain in one room virtually, to be able to add that sense of virtual presence and immersion and persistence and social aspect, I think is going to be really important. And it's also going to be a great equalizer because as much as we hate to admit it, I think, people tend to make judgments based on somebody's age or how they look. And you take that away and we're all avatars. And it kind of will equalize people in a way that I think is going to be really interesting and have a dramatic impact on the workforce. And so we can really reach this level of true globalization. And I think when it comes to supply chain and logistics, it takes it away from thinking how far away China is, from England or from the US or something, and really puts everyone in the same room and is able to humanize the digital and virtual experience in a way that we previously could only do physically.
Okay, so and you are talking about avatars, and I was when you were talking about this, I was thinking about more the like digital copies of ourselves that are so good that if I am talking about a problem to the supply chain team, and I see one of my colleagues who is from China starting to look worried, then I can address him and say, "Hey, you're starting to look worried. Is there something going on in your operation that you are worrying about? How can we solve this?" And I was thinking along these ways. But when you are talking about the avatars and taking like making us more equal and the same. I also thought, then maybe we also lose the facial expression and the emotion, which is I would say one of the added benefits of getting a more personal experience when doing business with people.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's a really good point. Yeah, I think we're going to have the option. And, like on things like Zoom now, you can have augmented filters that, make you look fresh and bright and those kind of things. We'll have the same options for our avatars, But we're also, here comes AI again. I think we're also moving into an age where it's going to become difficult digitally to trust what we see and what we hear. And I think inside virtual spaces, there is an opportunity to be able to solve that problem. And what I'm talking about here is things like deep fakes. And we're already seeing this kind of go mainstream. There's a social media called Twin Chat that offers an endless scroll of fake celebrity news and interviews. And essentially what they've done is they've scraped the internet for interviews with 1,000 celebrities and created what they call a mind deep fake. So, if you ever wanted relationship advice from Taylor Swift, you can, now have that fake conversation, right? And find out. But the worry here is that while intellectually we understand that this isn't real, our brains are trained to believe what we see and what we hear. So we can anticipate that this is going to become weaponized in future elections and politically.
Yeah.
And this is all kind of some of the risks that we need to be thinking about with these technologies. Another risk that I talk about is the environmental impact. So I recently did a TED Talk asking the question, is the metaverse bad for the environment? And that's on YouTube if anybody wants to check it out. But I'm also now looking into the environmental impact of generative AI. And we know things like to do a search, it already uses 4 to 5 times more energy than doing a regular
tons of
search.
energy, yeah.
And training these models is very energy consuming. And so as we look to maybe move away from large language models like the chat GPTs into more personalized models for individual companies or for people eventually, that's a lot of energy and quite a significant footprint potentially. And all these companies that I work with say, I'm going to be net zero by 2025 or 2030. And they're not considering not only AI, but also the footprint of the data. Once we move from a 2D internet into a 3D internet, our data moves from 2D to 3D. And then also things like blockchain. So there's a lot to be discussed here. And I think we have to really keep in mind that we need to keep our goals flexible, but also be inclusive of all these things that are coming down the line.
Now, I absolutely agree. Now, I think we could go on for hours about all these new technologies and new possibilities. But if you don't mind, I like to go to let's say the final question. And my final question to you is what would be the first steps companies could take when looking at these new technologies that you have just described?
Absolutely. So I often say the best way to learn is from doing. And when it comes to, say, generative AI, identify areas in your business that an AI assistant could add value to the human experience, could make somebody's life easier, and map out what a life cycle of implementing this technology is. So is it, for a quarter? Is it for 6 months? Is it for a year?
Yeah.
What would you ideally like to see as the benefits come out of this? And then start small. Start with implementing it in one area of your business with one team that's dedicated to seeing this through. And out of that experience, you will learn more than you could just from reading about it or listening to somebody like me. And then being able to take that active experience that you've had, and that will inform how you can start to expand it throughout the business. But I think it's important to see it through the life cycle, to not treat this as a toy, to take it seriously, and to begin now. Also, to empower your employees to also, if they feel motivated and they feel excited to they see an opportunity to implement it, to support that and to be able to audit it. And that's my second point, which is have a governance plan in place. Be able to internally audit how it's being used, audit the ROI. And this probably means that for any IT workers out there, your job's just got a bit harder, but probably also a bit cooler because you get to do something that is new and exciting. So I'd say really try to embrace that and get on board with that. But we have to make sure that as companies and individuals, we are being responsible with this technology because we cannot wait for regulators to tell us what to do or somebody else to set an industry standard. We have to be responsible for ourselves.
Okay, so be bold and try.
Yes.
But on the same side, on the same side of that coin, or the other side of the coin, also be careful and audit what you do.
Yes.
Okay, excellent advice. Well, for those interested in the TED Talk on logisticsmatter.com, I'll put the link in the article there, so people can click it and watch that talk. I'm gonna watch it. Very interested. Amelia, I want to thank you for telling us more about all these new technologies, and it looks like we're in for even more exciting times than we are already in.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Does Logistics Matter? For more on trends and innovations in supply chain and logistics, visit our blog on logisticsmatter.com. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, please send an email to podcast@logisticsmatter.com. This podcast was produced by Dimitry VleugelThe. The music is based on a sample by Ragaman and produced by Michael Spengler. This episode was supported by Amelia Kallman. Amelia is a futurist, speaker and author on innovation and technology. She consults brands, agencies and governments on the impact of new technologies on the future of business and our lives. For more information, visit ameliakallman.com. That's AmeliaKallman.com.